Why would you do something like this without telling me? Jungkook's voice cracked as he stared at Jimin, his trembling hands clutching a small envelope that should never have reached him. Do you really think I wanted you to find out this way? Jimin answered quietly, unable to meet his eyes, while Suga stood nearby in complete silence, his expression carrying a sadness that words could not explain. The backstage room suddenly felt unbearably still, broken only by Jungkook's uneven breathing as tears rolled down his face. No one, not RM, Jin, J-Hope, or Taehyung dared interrupt the moment. Whatever was hidden inside that envelope had shattered every assumption Jungkook had made about his closest friend. But what kind of gift could make a son cry this deeply? And why had Jimin desperately tried to keep it a secret until the very end? Before we uncover the truth behind this fictional story, tell us honestly, if someone silently changed your family's life without asking for recognition, would you feel grateful or heartbroken? The elegant private dining room on the top floor of a luxury hotel was wrapped in a warm amber glow, with soft lights reflecting across polished wooden walls and crystal glasses arranged neatly on a long dining table. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city shimmered beneath the night sky, its countless lights stretching toward the horizon like distant stars. The muffled sounds of traffic below could barely be heard, replaced by the quiet melody of a piano drifting from the hotel's main lounge. It was supposed to be one of the rare evenings when the 7 BTS members could forget about schedules, rehearsals, interviews, and cameras, even if only for a few hours. Their management had reserved the room to celebrate the successful conclusion of another demanding promotional schedule, giving them an opportunity to relax together before everyone returned to their individual commitments. Laughter filled the room as Jin proudly insisted everyone try the grilled beef he had personally recommended after reading the hotel's menu online days earlier. J-Hope teased him by claiming he had spent more time researching dinner than practicing choreography, causing everyone around the table to burst into laughter. RM shook his head with an amused smile while carefully pouring sparkling water into the glasses beside him. Taehyung leaned back comfortably in his chair, occasionally glancing through the large window at the glowing skyline before joining the conversation with his usual dry humor. Even Suga, who was often the quietest in gatherings like this, allowed himself a small smile as he watched the members joking with one another. Jungkook, seated beside Jimin, looked noticeably more relaxed than he had been during the exhausting week. He had spent most of the previous days moving between rehearsals, recordings, and interviews, leaving little time for himself. Tonight, however, he seemed determined to enjoy every minute. He laughed freely, exchanged playful remarks with Jimin, and even challenged Jin over whose choice of dessert would be better. For a brief moment, the pressure of being global artists disappeared, replaced by the familiar comfort of 7 friends sharing an ordinary meal. The hotel staff entered quietly, serving course after course with careful professionalism. Plates of perfectly prepared steak, roasted vegetables, seafood pasta, fresh salads, and warm artisan bread were placed on the table. The aroma of butter, herbs, and freshly cooked food blended into the room, making the atmosphere even more inviting. Every server moved discreetly, respecting the members' privacy while ensuring nothing interrupted the peaceful evening they had earned after weeks of relentless work. Jimin smiled as he watched the others eat. He contributed to the conversations when spoken to, laughed at the jokes, and politely thanked the staff whenever another dish arrived. To anyone observing from across the room, he looked completely at ease. Yet Suga noticed something almost invisible to everyone else. Between conversations, Jimin's eyes occasionally drifted toward the phone resting face down beside his plate. Every few minutes, his fingers unconsciously brushed against it, as though he were waiting for a message that never came. His smile remained warm, but it lingered just a little too briefly before fading into quiet thoughtfulness. Suga had known Jimin long enough to recognize the difference between genuine relaxation and carefully maintained composure. Years of working, traveling, and sharing life's highest and lowest moments had taught him to notice the smallest changes, a slower response during conversations, an absent-minded glance, a forced smile that lasted a fraction too long. He said nothing. Instead, he quietly continued eating, observing with the patience of someone who understood that certain questions should only be asked when the moment felt right. Across the table, RM began reminiscing about their trainee years, laughing as he recalled nights when they shared instant noodles because none of them could afford proper meals. Jin dramatically insisted those noodles tasted better than anything served in five-star hotels, earning another chorus of laughter from the group. Even the staff standing near the entrance smiled softly as they listened to the lively conversation without intruding. Jungkook glanced toward Jimin and nudged him gently with his elbow. "You've been awfully quiet tonight," he said with a playful grin. "Don't tell me you're already thinking about tomorrow's schedule." Jimin chuckled and shook his head. "Just enjoying listening to everyone. That's suspicious," Taehyung teased. "Normally you're one of the loudest people at the table." "I'm getting older," Jimin replied dramatically. "No," Jin interrupted immediately. "You're getting better at pretending to be mature." Room erupted with laughter once again. Even Jimin laughed sincerely this time, covering his face in embarrassment while Jungkook playfully patted his shoulder. For a while, everything felt perfectly ordinary. Then, just as dessert was about to be served, Jimin's phone vibrated once against the polished wooden table. The sound was soft, almost unnoticeable. Everyone else continued talking. Only Suga saw the color quietly disappear from Jimin's face as he looked at the notification on the screen. Jimin did not unlock his phone immediately. Instead, he rested his fingertips lightly on the edge of the device, as though simply feeling its presence would somehow delay whatever waited on the screen. Around him, the atmosphere remained warm and lively. Freshly brewed tea was poured into delicate porcelain cups, dessert plates were arranged one by one, and soft piano music continued flowing through the hotel's speakers. To everyone else, nothing had changed. Only Suga noticed that Jimin's breathing had become almost imperceptibly slower. A waiter politely placed a small chocolate mousse in front of Jimin. "Enjoy your dessert, sir." Jimin looked up with a gentle smile. "Thank you." His voice sounded perfectly normal, too normal. Suga lowered his eyes for a moment before quietly picking up his spoon. He had seen that expression before, not during performances or interviews, but during the private moments when Jimin tried his hardest to protect everyone else from worrying about him. Jungkook, completely unaware, leaned forward with a grin. "Been waiting for dessert more than dinner." Jin laughed loudly. "I knew it. You only came for the sweets." "I came because you said there would be steak." And the steak disappeared too fast. The entire table laughed again. Even Jimin smiled. But his smile disappeared the instant everyone's attention shifted back toward their own conversations. Almost instinctively, he unlocked his phone beneath the edge of the table. One message. No name. Just a number he recognized immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the screen for several silent seconds. Then he quietly locked it again. No reply. No reaction. He simply placed the phone back beside his plate exactly where it had been before. Suga watched everything without saying a word. Years together had taught him that Jimin rarely hid his own problems. He hid other people's. That difference mattered. RM noticed Suga looking toward Jimin and casually asked, "Everything okay?" Suga answered before Jimin could. "I think he's just tired." Jimin looked at Suga for the briefest moment. It was barely noticeable, just a small glance, yet it carried silent gratitude. "Yeah," Jimin added softly. "Just a long week." No one questioned it further. The conversation drifted naturally toward upcoming rehearsals, future travel plans, and funny memories from previous tour. Outside, light rain had begun to fall over the city. Tiny droplets slid slowly across the enormous glass windows, blurring the colorful lights beyond them. Inside the room, warmth surrounded the table. Outside, the night seemed strangely distant. Jimin quietly excused himself. "Be back in a minute." He smiled politely before leaving the dining room. The heavy wooden door closed behind him with a soft click. Only after several seconds did Suga calmly place his napkin beside his plate. "I'll check on him." No one thought twice about it. "Tell him not to escape before dessert," J-Hope joked. "Try." Suga stepped into the silent hotel corridor. The laughter from the dining room immediately became muffled behind the closed door. The hallway stretched ahead beneath warm ceiling lights, decorated with elegant paintings and fresh white lilies placed at regular intervals. At the far end, near a large window overlooking the rain-soaked city, Jimin stood completely still. His shoulders were slightly lowered. One hand rested inside his pocket. The other held his phone tightly. He wasn't crying, but he looked like someone trying very hard not to. Suga approached slowly without making a sound. He stood beside Jimin, leaving enough space that the silence never felt intrusive. For nearly a full minute, neither of them spoke. Together they watched the rain sliding down the glass. Finally, Suga broke the silence. "You don't have to carry everything alone." Jimin gave a faint smile without looking away from the window. "I know. You've said I know every time I've told you that. I guess I never learn." Suga folded his arms. "So, what's different tonight?" Jimin remained silent. The rain continued tapping gently against the window. Far below, headlights reflected across wet streets like ribbons of gold. After another long pause, Jimin quietly opened his phone again. He handed it to Suga without saying anything. Suga read the message. His eyes moved slowly from the first line to the last. The calm expression on his face changed almost imperceptibly. Not into shock, into understanding. He returned the phone. "When did you know?" "A few months ago." "You never told anyone?" Jimin slowly shook his head. "I promised." "Promised to who?" Jimin looked down at the screen once more before locking it. "To someone who wanted their dignity protected more than they wanted help." Suga remained silent. He understood that answer immediately. Jimin had always been like this. Whenever someone trusted him with their pain, he carried it as if it were his own. Not because he had to, because he believed no one should ever feel alone while facing something difficult. "What are you planning to do?" Suga finally asked. Jimin exhaled slowly. "I already did it." Suga frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Jimin hesitated. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Carefully, almost reluctantly, he pulled out a small cream-colored envelope. There was no writing on the front, no decoration, just a neatly folded envelope that had clearly been handled many times. "I was supposed to give this to someone tomorrow morning." Suga looked at it quietly. "What is it?" Jimin gently turned the envelope over in his hands. His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's for Jungkook's mother." Suga's eyes lifted toward Jimin. The hallway suddenly felt much quieter than before. "What exactly is inside?" Jimin stared at the envelope for several long seconds before answering. "Something I hoped Jungkook would never have to find out." Several seconds, neither of them moved. The only sound filling the hotel corridor was the gentle rhythm of rain tapping against the enormous glass windows overlooking the sleeping city. The distant hum of traffic floated upward from the streets below, blending with the faint piano melody that escaped from the restaurant behind the closed wooden doors. Suga kept his eyes on the cream-colored envelope resting carefully in Jimin's hands. It looked ordinary, lightweight, slightly worn at the edges with no handwriting, no seal, nothing that suggested it carried the kind of secret capable of reducing someone to silence. "Been carrying this all evening?" Suga finally asked. Jimin nodded almost imperceptibly. "I wasn't sure whether today was the right day." Now, Jimin looked toward the rain-covered skyline. Still not sure. Suga did not rush another question. He knew Jimin rarely hesitated unless the decision in front of him affected someone he deeply cared about. Years of friendship had taught him that Jimin could endure criticism, exhaustion, and even physical pain with remarkable resilience. But when another person's emotions were involved, he became painfully careful, weighing every word and every action as though one wrong step could leave a permanent scar. Behind them, the dining room erupted into another wave of laughter. Through the thick wooden door came the unmistakable sound of Jin protesting dramatically over something J-Hope had said, followed by Taehyung's deep laugh and Jungkook's cheerful voice trying to defend himself. The familiar sounds felt comforting, yet strangely distant, as though they belonged to a completely different evening. Suga glanced toward the door before returning his attention to Jimin. "Wondering where we are. I know. You don't want them worrying." "Never do." Suga gave a faint smile. "That's exactly the problem." Jimin looked down without answering. For a long moment, they simply stood together beneath the warm corridor lights, neither trying to fill the silence unnecessarily. Their friendship had never depended on constant conversation. Sometimes understanding came through nothing more than standing beside one another. Finally, Suga spoke again. "Tell me how this started." Jimin slowly slipped the envelope back inside his jacket before resting both hands in his pockets. "It happened months ago." He paused, collecting the memories carefully. "It wasn't planned." Suga remained quiet. "It was during one of the few weekends when our schedules suddenly opened up," Jimin continued. "Everyone went their own way for a day or two. Jungkook had already left to spend time with his family. I was visiting an old neighborhood because I wanted to see someone who had helped me years ago. The music teacher," Jimin smiled softly. "Yes, I remember. Wasn't home, so you waited. I decided to walk instead." Memory seemed to slow his voice. "It was raining that afternoon too. Outside the hotel windows, another wave of rain swept across the glass as though echoing the story itself. I stopped at a small neighborhood cafe to wait until the weather cleared. Coincidence? That's what I thought." Jimin's eyes became distant. But then someone walked in. Suga didn't interrupt. It was Jungkook's mother. The first time since leaving the dining room, Suga's expression shifted ever so slightly. "She recognized you," Jimin nodded. "Immediately." "What was she doing there, waiting?" For Jungkook, Jimin slowly shook his head. "No, there was another pause for someone else." Answer only deepened the mystery. Suga folded his arms. "Never mention meeting her. I promised I wouldn't." "She asked you to keep it secret." "Yes." Jimin leaned lightly against the window. "At first we only talked about ordinary things." He smiled faintly as he remembered. "She asked whether I was eating enough." Suga couldn't help smiling. "That sounds like her." "Asked whether Jungkook was sleeping properly." "Probably wasn't." "Wasn't." Both of them laughed quietly. The warmth disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. "Then," Jimin continued, "I noticed something." "What?" She kept looking at the entrance every few seconds, like she was expecting someone. "Exactly. They arrive?" "No." Kept waiting. Jimin lowered his gaze. "Nearly an hour." Corridor became silent once more. When she finally stood up, Jimin said quietly, "She smiled and apologized for making me stay longer than I probably wanted. You could tell something was wrong." "Could." "She wouldn't say it." "Changed?" Jimin inhaled deeply before answering. As she reached for her bag, his voice slowed. An envelope slipped onto the floor. "The same one?" Jimin nodded. "I picked it up before she noticed." "What was inside?" "I didn't know then." "You didn't look." "I would never do that." Suga nodded in understanding. "So how did you find out?" Jimin's expression softened with quiet sadness. "Because she accidentally told me." He looked toward the rain again. "With words." "Then how?" Jimin closed his eyes briefly. "When she reached for the envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't even hold it." Suga felt a heaviness settle in his chest. "And then?" She smiled. "Normal smile." Jimin slowly shook his head. "Kind of smile people wear when they're trying to convince everyone, including themselves, that everything is fine." He looked directly at Suga for the first time since beginning the story. "That's when I realized she wasn't waiting for someone." He swallowed quietly. She was trying to decide whether she had enough courage to ask for help. Suga remained completely still. The weight of those words lingered between them. Back inside the private dining room, none of the others had any idea that, only a few steps away, a forgotten meeting from months earlier was beginning to unravel a secret that would soon change the way Jungkook saw one of his closest friends forever. Suga remained silent long after Jimin finished speaking. He had expected a difficult story, but not one carried so quietly for so many months. The corridor felt even more isolated now, as though the rest of the hotel had faded into the background. Beyond the rain-streaked glass, the city's lights shimmered like distant memories, while inside the soft golden lighting cast long shadows across the polished marble floor. "What happened after that?" Suga asked at last. Jimin let out a slow breath. "I couldn't just walk away. You stayed." "I asked if she was all right." "And?" She smiled. "The same smile," Jimin nodded. "Kind that tells you someone has practiced pretending to be okay for a very long time." Suga lowered his eyes. He had seen that expression countless times, not only in strangers but in artists, trainees, friends, and even himself during difficult years. "So she still didn't tell you?" Made her finally open up. Jimin's expression softened. I didn't ask another question. Suga looked surprised. You didn't, Jimin shook his head. I simply sat back down. Memory unfolded slowly in his mind. We talked about ordinary things again. The weather, the neighborhood, restaurants that had disappeared, the flowers outside the cafe, even the music that was playing. Suga listened without interrupting. It took almost 40 minutes. And then she asked me something. What? Jimin's voice became quieter. Can I ask you something? Not as Jungkook's bandmate, but as Park Jimin. Suga could almost picture the moment. What did you say? I told her. Of course. Jimin looked toward the rain once again. She thanked me first. What? For always looking after Jungkook. A faint smile appeared on Jimin's face. I told her that Jungkook looks after all of us just as much. Suga smiled. That's true. Smile quickly disappeared. Then she apologized. What? She said she never wanted Jungkook to worry. Suga frowned slightly. Worry about what? Jimin hesitated. His fingers unconsciously tightened inside his jacket pocket. She explained that something unexpected had happened several months earlier. What kind of situation? A financial one. Suga's expression became serious. Nodded slowly. A close relative. The treatment became much more expensive than anyone expected. They tried everything they could. Savings, insurance, borrowing from relatives. They sold belongings they no longer needed. It still wasn't enough. Hallway grew impossibly quiet. Why didn't Jungkook know? Because she refused to tell him. Why? Jimin answered almost immediately. Because she knew exactly what he would do. Suga didn't need further explanation. He would drop everything. Would insist on paying, without thinking twice. Jimin nodded. She said he already carries enough responsibility, worries about everyone, rarely puts himself first. I couldn't argue with her. Suga slowly exhaled, so she chose to carry it herself. Until she couldn't anymore. Jimin looked down. She wasn't asking me for money, wasn't asking for help. Only wanted advice. Wanted someone who wasn't emotionally involved enough to panic, but who cared enough to listen. Suga understood immediately. That's why she spoke to you. Jimin nodded. I listened, for hours. What did you tell her? I told her there is nothing shameful about accepting help. What did she say? Jimin smiled sadly. She said accepting help wasn't what frightened her. What frightened her then? Losing my son's smile. Closed his eyes for a brief moment. Those words settled heavily in the silence. Thought about that sentence almost every day since. Jimin admitted quietly. I believed her. He looked back toward the dining room door. You know Jungkook. Suga gave a small nod. If he found out, would blame himself. Would wonder why no one told him. Would replay every conversation. Every missed phone call, every family visit. He'd think he failed. And none of that would be true. Suga finished the sentence softly. No, wouldn't. Another long silence passed. The rain outside had become gentler now, leaving tiny droplets clinging to the glass like scattered crystals. So, Suga asked carefully. Envelope. Jimin slowly removed it once more. I couldn't ignore what I'd learned. I couldn't break the promise either, so I found another way. What way? Jimin carefully turned the envelope over in his hands. I spoke with someone I trusted. Who? Our manager. Suga looked surprised. You told him everything? No. What he absolutely needed to know. Never mention names. I never revealed the family's situation. I only asked whether there was a way to quietly help someone, without allowing them to feel like they were receiving charity. Suga's eyes remained fixed on the envelope, and it took weeks. Legal paperwork, private arrangements, anonymous assistance, publicity, no photographs, no records connected to us. No one would ever know. You made sure of that. I had to. Suga looked directly at Jimin. So what's inside the envelope? Jimin's voice was barely above a whisper. Final documents. They confirm everything has already been taken care of. Suga blinked slowly, nodded. The remaining medical expenses, outstanding debts, the transportation costs, the rehabilitation support, everything. Suga stared at him. You handled all of this without telling any of us. Jimin smiled faintly. It was never supposed to become anyone else's burden. Suga shook his head with quiet disbelief. No, became yours. Before Jimin could answer, the hotel dining room door suddenly opened. Warm light spilled into the corridor. Footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor. Jungkook's familiar voice broke the silence. There you two are. He smiled at first, unaware of the conversation he had interrupted. Then his eyes slowly drifted downward. toward the cream-colored envelope still resting in Jimin's hands. Jungkook slowed to a stop only a few steps away. The easy smile that had been on his face moments earlier faded as his eyes lingered on the envelope in Jimin's hands. He had not heard the conversation. He had only walked out of the dining room because the two of them had been gone longer than expected, and Jin had jokingly complained that dessert was getting cold. Yet something about the silence in the hallway immediately told him this was no ordinary conversation. "There you are," Jungkook said, forcing a small smile. "Everyone's waiting." Neither Jimin nor Suga answered immediately. Jungkook's expression shifted. "Did something happen?" Jimin instinctively slipped the envelope behind his back. "No, we were just talking." Jungkook looked from Jimin to Suga, then back again. "You two are terrible liars." Suga let out a quiet sigh. "It's nothing you need to worry about." Answer only made Jungkook more uneasy. "When someone tells me not to worry, that's usually the moment I start worrying." His eyes settled once more on the envelope. "What is that?" Jimin hesitated. "Just some paperwork." "What paperwork?" "It isn't important." Jungkook frowned. "If it isn't important, why are both of you standing out here looking like the world just stopped turning?" The hallway fell silent again. Jimin searched for the right words but found none that could protect both Jungkook and the promise he had made. Suga quietly stepped forward. "Jungkook, what? Go back inside." "Don't want to? We'll be there in a minute." No, his voice remained calm, but there was unmistakable determination behind it. "No, something's wrong." Jimin looked at him with gentle eyes. "Nothing is wrong with us." "Then tell me why you're hiding that envelope." Jimin lowered his gaze. "I can't." Jungkook's heart sank. "You can't." The words echoed softly through the corridor. "Never said that to me before." Jimin swallowed quietly. "I'm sorry." "What?" For not being able to explain. Jungkook's breathing became slower. The distance between them suddenly felt much greater than a few steps. "I trusted that we never kept secrets from each other." Jimin closed his eyes briefly. "I know, so why now?" His voice was no longer demanding answers. It sounded hurt, deeply hurt. Suga watched the exchange without interrupting. He understood both sides. He understood Jimin's promise, and he understood the quiet disappointment growing inside Jungkook. Jimin slowly looked back up. "You trust me?" "Without asking me to explain tonight." Jungkook stared into his eyes. Normally, that question alone would have been enough. But tonight something felt different. His attention returned to the envelope. A tiny corner of a familiar photograph had slipped out, only a few centimeters, barely visible, yet it was enough. Jungkook frowned. He stepped forward instinctively. "Wait." Jimin immediately noticed. Before he could react, the photograph slid completely free from the envelope and drifted gently onto the polished marble floor. Time seemed to freeze. No one moved. Jungkook slowly bent down and picked it up. His fingers trembled before he had even turned it over. When he did, his breathing stopped. It was an old family photograph. His mother was standing in front of their modest home, smiling warmly at the camera. He remembered that day. He had taken the picture years earlier. He slowly lifted his eyes toward Jimin. "Why do you have this?" Jimin remained silent. Jungkook turned the photograph over. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were just a few simple words. "Please don't let my son know." Handwriting belonged to his mother. His heartbeat quickened. He looked back at the envelope still in Jimin's hand, then at Suga. Neither of them spoke. 1,000 thoughts collided inside his mind all at once. Confusion, fear, disbelief. His voice became almost a whisper. "When did you meet my mother?" The question lingered in the corridor long after Jungkook had spoken it. No one answered. The silence itself became an answer that frightened him even more. His fingers tightened around the old photograph until the edges bent slightly beneath the pressure. He immediately loosened his grip, carefully smoothing the corners as though afraid of damaging one of the few memories he carried with him wherever he traveled. He looked at the smiling face of his mother again. The picture had clearly been treasured. It had not been folded carelessly. It had not been hidden at the bottom of a bag. It had been protected, carried, kept close. Slowly, Jungkook raised his eyes toward Jimin. "My mother's words." His voice trembled. "She wrote this." Jimin nodded almost invisibly. "Yes." "You've met her?" "Yes." "When?" Jimin remained quiet for several seconds before finally answering. "A few months ago." Jungkook searched his face as if hoping he would suddenly smile and admit everything was an elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, Jimin simply stood there, unable to hide the sadness in his eyes. A few months, Jungkook repeated. A few months, he laughed once, a short, broken laugh with no happiness behind it. A few months, he looked down at the photograph again. I called home almost every day. Another laugh escaped him. I visited whenever my schedule allowed. His breathing became uneven. And not once did anyone tell me you had met my mother. Suga quietly stepped closer. Jungkook. But Jungkook gently raised one hand, not in anger, only because he needed a moment. He swallowed hard. I don't understand. He looked back at Jimin. Were you helping her? Jimin didn't answer. Were you? Another silence. Jungkook's voice cracked. Just tell me that. Jimin finally nodded. Yes. The single word echoed through the empty corridor. Jungkook closed his eyes. He inhaled deeply, but the air felt too heavy to reach his lungs. For how long? Since the day we met. Why? Because she asked me for something. Money, favors. Only one promise. Stared at him. What promise? Jimin's voice became almost inaudible. That I wouldn't let you carry her worries. Jungkook froze. His heartbeat pounded loudly in his ears. My mother asked you that? Jimin nodded. She didn't want your smile to disappear. The words landed with devastating weight. Jungkook slowly shook his head. No. His whisper barely escaped. No. He remembered every phone call, every conversation, every time his mother had smiled through the screen and insisted everything was fine, every time she had asked whether he was eating enough, whether he was sleeping well, whether the members were healthy. Never once had she mentioned herself. Never once had she asked for anything. His knees suddenly felt weak. He leaned against the wall to steady himself. Suga instinctively reached out, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Jungkook didn't even seem to notice. His eyes never left Jimin. What happened? His voice was smaller now. What was she hiding from me? Jimin slowly removed the envelope from inside his jacket. For several long seconds he simply looked at it. Then he carefully held it out toward Jungkook. I was supposed to give this back to her tomorrow. Jungkook hesitated before accepting it. The envelope felt surprisingly heavy, not because of its weight, because of everything it represented. His fingers trembled as he opened the flap. Inside were neatly organized documents, letters, receipts, hospital records, payment confirmations, several handwritten notes, one sealed letter addressed to his mother. He stared at the unfamiliar paperwork without understanding. What is all this? His voice sounded distant. Jimin answered quietly. Chapter she hoped you would never have to read. Jungkook slowly lifted one receipt. His eyes scanned the numbers, then another, and another. The totals grew larger. Medical expenses, treatment costs, transportation, rehabilitation, outstanding balances. Every page carried the same word, paid. He blinked once, twice, certain he had misunderstood. His breathing became uneven again. He looked toward Jimin. You. His voice broke. You paid these? Jimin lowered his head. It wasn't about me. Answer me. You paid them. After a long silence. Yes. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. Why? You had no obligation. Never even told me. You carried this alone. His voice grew louder with every sentence. Do you have any idea what this means? Jimin answered softly. I do. Tears gathered in Jungkook's eyes. Don't. His shoulders began trembling. Always believed that if my family ever needed me, I'd be there. He looked down at the documents again, but I wasn't. His tears finally spilled onto the pages. I wasn't there. Jimin immediately stepped closer. You were. Jungkook shook his head. No, you were working. I was away. You were building a future for everyone you love. I should have known. Couldn't. I should have. You couldn't. His voice remained calm but unwavering. Your mother made sure of that. Jungkook covered his face with one trembling hand. I failed her. No, Jimin's answer came instantly. You honored her every single day. Then why did someone else have to stand beside her? The question hung painfully between them. Jimin slowly reached forward and rested both hands gently on Jungkook's shoulders. Their eyes met. You know why? Jungkook couldn't answer. Because she never wanted you to choose between your dream and your family. Another tear rolled down Jungkook's face. She believed in you so completely that protecting your heart became more important to her than asking for help. Jungkook's breathing collapsed into quiet sobs. He looked at Jimin through blurred vision. And you protected her promise. Jimin nodded once. I tried. Without warning, Jungkook stepped forward and wrapped both arms tightly around Jimin. The envelope slipped from his hand, scattering several papers across the polished floor. Neither of them cared. Jungkook buried his face against Jimin's shoulder as years of restrained emotion finally broke free. His body shook uncontrollably. "I'm sorry." The words came between sobs. "I'm so sorry." Jimin gently held him without saying anything. Some grief cannot be interrupted. Some apologies need no response. Suga quietly knelt on the floor, gathering the scattered papers one by one with extraordinary care, making sure not a single document was creased. His own vision had blurred, but he remained composed, understanding that this moment belonged to the two friends standing only a few feet away. At that exact moment, the dining room door slowly opened once again. RM stepped into the hallway first, followed by Jin, J-Hope, and Taehyung. The smiles they had carried only seconds earlier disappeared instantly. No one spoke. They saw Jungkook crying uncontrollably in Jimin's arms. They saw Suga silently collecting documents from the floor. They saw the old family photograph resting beside the fallen envelope. None of them knew the full story yet, but every one of them understood they had just walked into a moment that would quietly change their family forever. For several long moments, no one in the corridor dared to speak. RM, Jin, J-Hope, and Taehyung remained standing near the dining room entrance, instinctively giving Jungkook and Jimin the space they needed. The warm light spilling from the private dining room stretched across the marble floor, illuminating the scattered documents Suga had already gathered into a neat stack. The rain outside had almost stopped, leaving only tiny droplets clinging to the enormous windows, while the city beyond continued moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside that quiet hallway, however, time seemed to stand still. Jungkook's shoulders continued trembling. His hands clung tightly to the back of Jimin's jacket as though he were afraid that letting go would somehow erase everything he had just learned. Jimin never attempted to pull away. Instead, he gently rested one hand on Jungkook's back, quietly reassuring him without speaking a single word. Sometimes silence carried compassion more honestly than language ever could. After nearly a minute, Jungkook finally stepped back. His eyes were swollen with tears. His breathing was still uneven. He quickly wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, embarrassed that the others had witnessed him breaking down. He tried to force a smile. "I'm sorry." Jin immediately shook his head. "Don't apologize." His voice was softer than usual. There was no teasing, no humor, only concern. RM walked forward slowly. "What happened?" No one answered immediately. Jungkook looked down at the envelope in his hands before taking a deep breath. "My mother." His voice cracked again. "Met Jimin." The members exchanged confused glances. "When?" Taehyung asked quietly. "A few months ago." J-Hope frowned. "We never knew." Jungkook slowly nodded. "I didn't either." Realization still sounded unreal even as he spoke the words aloud. Suga stepped closer to RM and silently handed him several of the documents that had fallen onto the floor. RM looked down. His expression gradually changed as he understood what he was reading. His eyes paused on one receipt, then another, then another. Every outstanding balance had been settled. Every treatment expense had been completed. Every payment confirmation carried the same final status, completed. RM slowly lowered the papers. He looked toward Jimin. "You." His voice became unusually quiet. "You handled all of this." Jimin hesitated. "I wasn't alone. Helped. Our manager arranged the legal process. The hospital cooperated. Few people made anonymous donations after I explained the situation without mentioning any names." "You never told us." "I couldn't. Because of your promise." Jimin nodded. RM closed his eyes briefly. He understood. A promise built on someone's dignity could not simply be broken because carrying it became difficult. Jin gently exhaled. "I thought tonight was just dinner." "So did I," Taehyung admitted. "No one could have imagined this." J-Hope looked toward Jungkook. Without saying anything, he quietly placed a comforting hand on Jungkook's shoulder. The youngest member lowered his head again. "Keep thinking." He spoke slowly. "About every phone call." His voice trembled. "Every time I asked if everything was okay, she always smiled." He laughed bitterly through fresh tears, and I believed her, Jimin answered gently. "Because she wanted you to." Jungkook looked up. "I should have noticed." "Couldn't. I know my mother better than anyone." "That's exactly why she knew how to protect you." Jungkook fell silent. Those words hurt because they felt true. He remembered how stubborn his mother had always been, how she preferred solving problems herself before allowing anyone else to worry, how she constantly encouraged him to focus on his dreams, even when she herself faced difficulties. He suddenly realized nothing about this was out of character. It was exactly what she would have done. That realization made his heart ache even more. After several minutes, the hotel manager quietly approached the end of the corridor. He stopped several meters away, careful not to interrupt. "Excuse me." His voice was respectful. "Dessert is ready whenever you feel comfortable returning." 7 members looked toward him. No one moved. The manager immediately understood. "I'll have the staff keep everything warm." He bowed politely before leaving as quietly as he had arrived. His footsteps faded into the distance. Jin looked around the corridor. "I don't think any of us are hungry anymore." No one disagreed. Suga carefully placed the last document back inside the envelope before handing it to Jungkook. "This belongs with your family now." Jungkook accepted it with both hands, almost instinctively, as though receiving something sacred. His fingers brushed against the handwritten note tucked inside. He slowly removed it. The envelope contained a single folded sheet of paper. His mother's handwriting immediately caught his attention. The others remained silent while he unfolded it. His eyes scanned the first line, then the second before long. Fresh tears blurred the page. His lips trembled as he silently continued reading. Jimin quietly looked away. He had never intended to witness this moment. Months earlier, Jungkook's mother had insisted that the letter only be opened if the truth ever came to light naturally. She had hoped it never would. Fate had chosen differently. Jungkook struggled to steady his breathing before reading part of the letter aloud. "If you're reading this," his voice shook, "then it means the promise I asked Jimin to keep has become too heavy for him to carry alone." Everyone listened without interruption. "I hope your first reaction isn't sadness." Jungkook paused, swallowing hard. "I hope your first reaction is gratitude. Because someone protected your heart exactly the way I always wanted to." His tears fell freely onto the page. "I asked Jimin not because he was famous, not because he had the ability to help, but because I saw kindness in his eyes." The hallway became impossibly quiet. Jungkook continued. "He listened to me as though I were his own family, and never once made me feel ashamed. Please don't be angry with him for keeping my promise. If you must blame someone, blame your stubborn mother." A broken laugh escaped Jungkook through his tears. The others smiled sadly. That sentence sounded exactly like something she would write. He continued reading. "My son, your greatest gift to me has never been success. It has always been the gentle person you became. Please continue living with that same heart. And if possible, thank Jimin for allowing a mother to keep her dignity." Jungkook could no longer continue. His voice disappeared completely. He lowered the letter, covering his eyes with one trembling hand. Without saying a word, RM stepped forward and embraced him. A moment later, Jin joined, then Taehyung, then J-Hope. Suga rested a reassuring hand on Jungkook's back while Jimin stood quietly beside him, his own eyes shimmering with restrained emotion. No cameras captured the moment. No fans witnessed it. No headlines would ever describe it. In the quiet corridor of a hotel, far away from the stage lights and roaring crowds, 7 men who had spent years calling one another family stood together in complete silence, reminded that the strongest bonds are often revealed not during moments of celebration, but during the quiet moments when someone chooses to carry another person's burden without ever expecting to be thanked. The following morning, the city awakened beneath a pale golden sunrise. Sunlight slowly spread across the skyline, reflecting from the glass towers that surrounded the hotel. Down below, commuters hurried toward another ordinary day. Cafes welcomed their first customers, and the streets gradually filled with life. From the outside, nothing suggested that the previous night had forever changed the hearts of 7 people staying high above the city. Inside one of the hotel suites, however, the atmosphere was unlike any other morning. The members had gathered quietly before breakfast. No television played in the background. No one reached for their phones. No one discussed rehearsals, interviews, or flights. The envelope rested in the center of the coffee table. It remained unopened now, its contents already known, yet no one felt comfortable putting it away. Jungkook sat on the sofa, holding his mother's letter once more. He had barely slept. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes, but there was something different in his expression. The confusion that had overwhelmed him the previous night had gradually been replaced by understanding. The pain remained, but alongside it came gratitude. He carefully folded the letter again before looking toward Jimin. Been thinking all night. Jimin quietly looked up. I kept asking myself why you. He smiled faintly. But now I think I finally understand. Jimin said nothing. Jungkook continued. My mother didn't choose someone who could solve her problem. She chose someone she believed would protect her dignity. Room became silent. Jimin lowered his eyes. Only did what anyone should do. Jin immediately shook his head. No, he leaned forward. That's not true. Everyone turned toward him. There are many people who feel sympathy. There are fewer who actually help. There are even fewer who help without expecting anyone to know. His voice remained calm. What you did wasn't ordinary. Jimin looked slightly uncomfortable. Never wanted anyone to see it that way, smiled gently. That's exactly why it matters. Suga quietly poured warm tea into several cups before placing one in front of Jimin. You know, he said softly, I kept asking myself something last night. Jimin glanced toward him. What? What would have happened if Jungkook had never discovered the truth? Jimin answered almost immediately. Nothing. Everyone looked at him. I would have delivered the envelope. I would have thanked his mother for trusting me. Life would have continued. You really expected no one to ever know? J-Hope asked. Jimin nodded. I hoped for that. Taehyung couldn't hide his amazement. You were prepared to carry that secret forever. It wasn't my secret. It belonged to someone who trusted me. Silence settled over the room again. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to question, only quiet respect. Later that afternoon, before leaving the hotel, Jungkook made a private phone call. The others deliberately gave him space. He stood alone near the window overlooking the city, his mother's letter folded neatly inside his jacket pocket. When she answered, her familiar warm voice instantly filled the room through the speaker. Did you sleep well? The ordinary question almost made him cry again. He smiled despite the tears gathering in his eyes. I did. There was a brief pause, then he asked gently, Mom. Yes. When were you planning to tell me? Silence answered him, not awkward silence, the silence of someone realizing the promise had finally reached its end. You know, her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, I'm sorry. No, Jungkook shook his head. I'm the one who's sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have noticed. You were exactly where you needed to be. I still wish I'd been there. You were. Her voice carried the same calm reassurance she had offered him since childhood. Even when you weren't physically beside me. Jungkook closed his eyes. I met someone yesterday. I know, he smiled through tears. I think. I've always known why you trusted him. His mother laughed softly. The moment I met Jimin. I forgot I was speaking to someone the whole world admired. I only saw a young man who listened. Jungkook glanced toward the living room where Jimin and the others were quietly preparing to leave. He never told me. I asked him not to. Kept your promise. I knew he would. Another gentle silence passed. Finally, she added, please don't let this become a burden. What do you mean? Don't spend the rest of your life feeling guilty. Don't know how. Then spend it feeling grateful instead. Her words settled deeply inside him. That single sentence quietly reshaped everything he had been thinking since the previous evening. Gratitude, not guilt. When the call ended, Jungkook remained by the window for several minutes before returning to the others. Without saying anything, he walked directly toward Jimin. The room fell quiet. Jungkook bowed deeply, far deeper than anyone expected. It was not the respectful bow of colleagues, nor the playful bow exchanged between close friends. It was the bow of a son expressing gratitude to someone who had stood beside his mother when he himself could not. Jimin immediately stepped forward. Don't. Jungkook remained there for several seconds before slowly straightening. His eyes were filled with emotion. Spend the rest of my life trying to repay this. Jimin smiled gently and shook his head. No, you don't owe me anything. Do, you really don't. Then tell me how I can thank you. Jimin thought for a moment, then he answered with a quiet smile. One day, when someone quietly needs help, help them the way your mother taught both of us. Stared at him. No amount of money, no gift, no speech could ever equal those words. Months passed. The story remained known only to a handful of people. No article appeared online. No interview mentioned it. No photograph surfaced. Fans simply noticed small changes. They noticed Jungkook calling his mother more often during breaks. They noticed Jimin and Jungkook exchanging quiet smiles that seemed to carry an unspoken understanding. They noticed Suga watching both of them with the calm expression of someone who knew a story that never needed public recognition. Years later, long after concerts had ended and schedules had become less relentless, the legacy of that evening continued in ways no audience could ever fully see. Jungkook quietly established a private family assistance fund through anonymous donations, helping relatives of patients facing financial hardship. He never attached his name to it. When asked why he preferred remaining anonymous, he simply smiled. "Some acts of kindness," he would say softly, "mean more when no one knows who began them." Whenever Jimin learned that another family had received help through the fund, he never congratulated Jungkook. He simply smiled, because in his heart, he knew the kindness had not truly started with him. It had begun with a mother's quiet determination to protect her son, and with a promise that transformed not only one family, but everyone fortunate enough to witness what genuine compassion looked like when no cameras were watching. There are moments in life that never appear in history books. They are never broadcast on television. They never become trending headlines. No audience applauds them. No cameras record them. And yet, those quiet moments often shape the people we become far more deeply than the victories the world celebrates. The evening in that hotel corridor eventually disappeared into memory. The rain stopped. The documents were carefully returned to their envelope. The lights in the private dining room were turned off one by one. The staff continued preparing the hotel for another busy day. Guests checked in and checked out without realizing that only a few hours earlier, just beyond those elegant hallways, a promise had reached its final destination. Life moved forward, as it always does, but the people who stood in that corridor were no longer quite the same. Jimin carried no pride for what he had done. Whenever he thought back to that evening, he never remembered the envelope. He never remembered the hospital documents. He never remembered the money. Instead, he remembered a mother who smiled more for her son than for herself. He remembered the quiet strength hidden behind gentle words. He remembered the courage it took for someone to ask for guidance without asking for sympathy. That memory stayed with him far longer than any act of generosity ever could. Suga also carried the memory differently. He often reflected on how easily pain can hide behind ordinary conversations. Someone can laugh at dinner, tell jokes, celebrate with friends, smile in photographs, and still be carrying a burden no one else can see. That realization changed the way he listened to people. He became even slower to judge silence, even more patient with those who struggled to explain what they were feeling. Sometimes the greatest kindness, he realized, was not solving another person's problem immediately. Sometimes it was simply creating a space where they no longer felt alone. RM would later say during a private conversation with the members that leadership had taught him many lessons, but none as unforgettable as witnessing compassion unfold without seeking recognition. He believed success was never measured solely by achievements or awards. It was measured by the number of people who felt safer because someone chose kindness over convenience. Jin continued to remember the image that had remained in his heart long after the details faded. Not the tears, not the documents, not even the embrace. He remembered Jimin instinctively thanking every hotel employee that evening despite carrying such emotional weight himself. That simple habit reminded Jin that character is revealed most clearly in ordinary moments, not extraordinary ones. J-Hope often found himself encouraging younger artists with a little more patience than before. He had witnessed how unseen struggles could exist behind bright smiles. Whenever someone appeared unusually quiet during rehearsals, he no longer assumed they were simply tired. Instead, he asked gentle questions. Sometimes they answered. Sometimes they didn't. Either way, they knew someone had noticed. Taehyung never forgot the expression on Jungkook's face when he realized his mother's greatest concern had never been herself. It had been protecting her son's happiness. That realization strengthened his appreciation for the sacrifices families quietly make every single day without expecting gratitude in return. As for Jungkook, the tears he shed that night eventually dried, but gratitude remained. Every visit home became a little longer. Every phone call became a little more meaningful. He learned that saying, "I love you," should never be postponed until tomorrow simply because today feels busy. He discovered that listening carefully can sometimes be the greatest gift a child gives a parent. Most importantly, he stopped measuring himself by the moments he had missed. Instead, he began measuring his life by the opportunities still waiting in front of him. The opportunity to be present, the opportunity to forgive himself, the opportunity to continue the kindness that someone else had quietly shown his family. Years later, the envelope itself was placed inside a small wooden keepsake box. Not because of the papers it once contained. Those had long since fulfilled their purpose. The envelope remained because it symbolized something far greater: a promise, trust, compassion, and the extraordinary power of protecting another person's dignity. No one outside that small circle ever needed to know the full story. Its value did not depend on public recognition. Kindness that requires applause is often temporary. Kindness that asks for nothing in return has the remarkable ability to continue traveling from one heart to another, long after the original act has ended. Perhaps that is why the most meaningful legacies are rarely built through grand speeches or unforgettable performances. They are built quietly: one conversation, one decision, one promise, one act of compassion at a time. And maybe the greatest lesson from this fictional story is not that one person helped another. It is that empathy has a way of multiplying. A mother's quiet courage inspired Jimin. Jimin's compassion transformed Jungkook. Jungkook's gratitude went on to help countless families he would never personally meet. One act of goodness became another, then another, until no one could clearly identify where it had truly begun. Perhaps that is exactly how kindness is meant to live, not as a single unforgettable moment, but as a chain of ordinary people choosing, again and again, to lighten someone else's burden before adding to their own. If this story leaves you with one question after the screen fades to black, let it be this: when life gives you the chance to quietly become the reason someone keeps believing in humanity, will you wait for the perfect moment? Or will you simply choose kindness before anyone is watching? 1 year had passed since the night when a simple dinner at a quiet hotel became a memory none of them would ever forget. The world had continued moving forward. Concerts had been held, songs had been recorded, stages had been illuminated by thousands of lights, and countless new memories had been created. From the outside, everything looked the same. The members continued their careers, continued making people smile, and continued standing beneath the spotlight that followed them wherever they went. But inside their own lives, something had changed, not dramatically, not in a way the public could easily see. It was something quieter, a deeper understanding of one another, a stronger appreciation for the small moments they once overlooked. For Jungkook, the year after that night became a journey of learning how to accept love without feeling guilty. At first, it was difficult. Every time he remembered what happened, the same question returned to his mind. Why didn't I know? Why wasn't I there? Why did someone else have to notice before me? Those questions followed him for weeks. But every time those thoughts appeared, he remembered his mother's words: "Do not turn love into regret." Those words slowly changed the way he viewed everything. He began understanding that his mother had never hidden the truth because she doubted him. She hid it because she believed in him. She wanted her son to continue chasing his dreams without carrying a weight she believed belonged to adults, not children, even when that child had grown into one of the most successful artists in the world. One quiet afternoon, Jungkook returned to his hometown. There were no cameras, no staff, no schedule, just him, his family, and a simple day away from everything. The neighborhood looked almost exactly as he remembered: the same streets, the same small shops, the same familiar sounds of people greeting each other. He walked slowly, taking in every detail. For years, he had always rushed through places like this, always moving toward the next destination, the next rehearsal, the next responsibility. But that day he allowed himself to stop. At the small cafe where Jimin had first met his mother, Jungkook sat by the window, the same place where a secret conversation had changed everything. He looked around quietly. The table was different now. The chairs had been replaced, the walls had been repainted, but somehow the feeling remained, a place where someone had listened, a place where someone had chosen compassion. The cafe owner recognized him and smiled warmly. "I heard you came here before." Jungkook smiled. "Yes, with your friend." He knew immediately who she meant. Jimin. Owner nodded. He was very kind. Jungkook looked down at his coffee cup. "I know." There was a small pause, then the owner smiled. "Your mother always said good people recognize each other." Jungkook looked up. "She said that many times." Those simple words stayed with him because they perfectly described what had happened. Jimin had not helped because of fame, because of obligation, because of expectations. He helped because he saw someone struggling and chose not to walk away. Later that evening, Jungkook visited his mother's home. They sat together quietly. No serious conversation, no dramatic moment. Just a mother and son sharing tea while watching the sunset. After a while, Jungkook spoke. "Mom, yes, thank you," she smiled. "What? For trusting him." She immediately knew who he meant. "I trusted you too." Jungkook looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I trusted that one day you would understand." He smiled softly. "I think I finally do." She reached across the table and gently held his hand. "Then remember something." "What?" "People who love you will not always protect you by telling you everything. Sometimes they protect you by carrying something until you are ready to understand." Jungkook looked outside the window. The evening sky was painted with shades of orange and gold. For the first time, the memory of that night no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a reminder that he was surrounded by people who loved him, not because of his achievements, not because of his success, but because of who he was when nobody was watching. Meanwhile, Jimin and Suga continued carrying their own reflections of that moment. One evening, long after another rehearsal ended, the two sat together in a quiet studio. The lights were dim. The room smelled faintly of coffee. A melody played softly from the speakers. Suga looked at Jimin while organizing some notes. "You know something?" Jimin looked up. "What?" "I think you still don't realize what you did." Jimin smiled slightly. "I helped someone." "No," Suga shook his head. "You reminded people what kindness looks like." Jimin looked away. "Don't think I did anything special." Suga laughed quietly. "That's exactly why it was special." Studio became quiet again. Outside, the city continued shining. Thousands of people were living their own stories, carrying their own struggles, waiting for their own moments of unexpected kindness. And somewhere among them, someone would remember the lesson from that night. That sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not change the entire world. Sometimes it is simply changing one person's world when they need it most.